United Kingdom, Suffolk County. The etymology of this word is interesting. On one hand, it refers to the Suffolk sheep breed, and maybe something else. As it sounds similar to the word safety, people might have once considered this a safe place during natural disasters. So, on the coast of Suffolk County, at a depth of 10 meters, there are ruins of an ancient city. Dunwich is a small settlement with the same name that still exists on the English coast today, but its population does not exceed 120 people. This is what remains of the city today, just a small, poor, God-forsaken village. According to historical records, in the 13th century, Dunwich was one of the largest ancient port cities in England and was comparable in size to London. The city of Suzy was protected by stone walls with a deep moat. Historians call this city the former capital of East Anglia. So, the medieval city of Dunwich thrived and developed rapidly, but in the 14th century, according to official history, the capital of East Anglia suddenly disappeared. And the reason for the disappearance of the largest city is not the numerous destructive medieval wars, as is often explained with cities in Europe and Asia, but something else. Official history states the city declined and disappeared due to major storms and hurricanes in the 13th and 14th centuries. For some unknown reason, they struck the east coast of England. A strong storm in 1347 literally washed the city walls and about 400 houses into the sea. And 15 years later, it completely destroyed the rest of the barely surviving part of the city. The surviving residents of the city didn't try to rebuild it anymore and left this cursed place. Official history says that in the late 14th century, England's oldest city vanished from world maps. Today, tourists visit the remains of the city, a small village. It must be admitted that this official scientific explanation is absurd. Yes, storms and hurricanes can indeed cause severe flooding. They can really erode the coastline, destroy or literally wash all coastal buildings into the sea, or cover a city with sand and silt. But this city was not simply washed away or destroyed by a giant wave. It literally sank under the water by 10 meters or more. Simply put, the water level off the coast of England suddenly rose so high that the entire city of Dunwich ended up underwater overnight. Many of the city's buildings, and this is an important point, discovered underwater in the early 21st century were not destroyed or ruined, but specifically submerged. And this proves that the historian's version is unconvincing. In reality, the city quickly went underwater, because the coastal water is very murky. In 2008, divers from the Dunwich project used multi-beam sonars and side-scan sonars to film the seabed across the entire area of the sunken city. For further work, in 2010, together with the British Broadcasting Corporation, modern acoustic imaging cameras were used to film the ruins through the murky water. In the first stage of the research, they discovered numerous outlines of the hulls of sunken ships in the port and several ruined structures, including 4 churches and the customs house buildings. In one of the images, it is clearly visible that even the spire of the sunken church protrudes through the silt and sand. In the following stages, hundreds of outlines of partially destroyed stone houses belonging to ordinary city residents were discovered, as well as the palaces of the nobility, numerous warehouses, workshops, and a huge accumulation of processed stone blocks from the embankment and the local port. It must be admitted that if all these buildings and palaces had been washed into the sea by a storm with the shoreline, as historians claim, divers would have found at best a pile of stones mixed with silt on the seabed, and at worst, nothing at all. But here, the instruments show that many buildings, under thick layers of silt, stand on the seabed exactly along the marked streets, and churches rise on the squares where they stood before the disaster. Even the customs building is almost intact and stands on the pier where it has always been located. The English coastal research expert Peter Murphy stated, "At first we thought that the ancient city of Dunwich was simply washed away by the storm and that nothing remained of it. But everyone was surprised that a huge part of the ruined city is still completely intact underwater and can be identified." During the work from 2013 to 2015, the ruins of the churches of St. Peter and St. Nicholas, the chapel of St. Catherine, as well as the remains of the City Hall were discovered. The locations of the Knights Templar Church and the Church of All Saints were also discovered, but they remain buried under a layer of sand from 1 to 3 meters thick. That is, everywhere we can see how the city was flooded. Research on the ruins of the city at the bottom of the sea is still ongoing today, so soon we may learn new details and see more interesting images. So, it is now clear to us that we are dealing with some kind of large-scale catastrophe that raised the ocean level by dozens of meters. An inquisitive researcher also suggested the possibility of a piece of land sinking underwater. However, experts argue that in this case the city could not have survived, since even with minor, numerous shifts in ground levels, buildings collapse hopelessly, and at best we would find architectural elements in a chaotic arrangement under a layer of silt. Parts of land may have sunk underwater during the catastrophe, which could have happened to Dunwich too. For example, there is a theory that at the same time, a vast territory called Doggerland sank underwater in the southern part of the North Sea near England. This raises the question, why do they intentionally misrepresent the city's submersion and shift the events to the 14th century? And some historical records and maps indicate that even in the 16th century, Dunwich had not yet been flooded and was still actively functioning. Here is the submerged forest by Dunwich. Here we can see that during a strong low tide, a submerged forest, or what remains of it, emerges from the water near the sunken city. You can see the stumps. According to the analysis of the wood by local scientists themselves, all these trees were growing back in the 16th century, which is actually quite unlikely. Could these trees really have stood here for 500 or even 700 years officially? The city is thought to have been washed away in the 14th century and never rebuilt. However, right in the center of Dunwich, there is a former Round Templar church, built by them in the likeness of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. After the order fell in the 14th century, it was given to the Order of Hospitallers. But according to the official record, this round church was destroyed in the 16th century by order of King Henry VIII. Then, the question arises, how could the king destroy the former church of the Templars Hospitallers in the 16th century if the city with this church was supposedly washed away back in the 14th century? Historians don't want to answer this uncomfortable question. Here's an old cannon recovered from underwater, where cannonballs served as breech blocks to store a plasma charge. As we now know, this weapon of enormous destructive power operated by accumulating atmospheric electricity. Many of the artifacts raised from the bottom of the sunken city have been dated by experts to the 16th century. Even in the 16th century, by official chronology, the city was still active. According to official history, during a storm in the 14th century it was badly damaged but still survived. The Franciscan monastery Greyfriars Ars, which was located on a small elevation and further inland from the shoreline. The stone wall, part of the refectory, and the 14th century gate of the monastery still remain today. But according to the same official record, in 1538 the monastery still existed and was first destroyed by order of King Henry VIII. It turns out that the city finally ceased to exist not in the 14th century, as scholars claim, but in the 16th, since the main part of any medieval settlement was always the monastery with its church. On all 16th century maps of England, Dunwich is still marked. And this isn't some god-forsaken little town in distant Asia that no one cares enough to check whether it exists or not. It's almost the second capital of England, one of the main port cities of the Old World. There are also plenty of documents showing that as early as the beginning of the 16th century, the city of Dunwich was visited by nobles from London, the royal family donated money to the city's churches, there was active trade, decrees were issued, and so on. So, the city of Dunwich disappeared not in the 14th but in the 16th century when a global catastrophe occurred, according to one version, supposedly in 1538. Today we know that in European countries there were many calendars created after the 18th century AD. In them, history was extended back by 2000 years and they differed from each other, even with the same dates, by several years to several centuries. Probably this was due to the fact that when creating a new history, each newly established country tried to create its own chronology, and historical events, in which they often overlapped, ended up in different historical periods, even going back to ancient times. Probably modern researchers, based on surviving documentary evidence and maps, conclude that the history we know began in the 18th century when religions were invented, countries and peoples were created, and numerous languages and cultures emerged. For them, the Earth experienced a planetary natural cataclysm at the beginning of the 19th century. Probably in earlier times, every century saw global catastrophes with large-scale tectonic shifts. But today, with this information being concealed, it's difficult to separate and systematize the facts by these periods, since these cataclysms are denied by science. If we accept the fact, proven by modern researchers, that the civilization we know today only began in the early 18th century, then it's possible that the city of Dunwich was flooded during the cataclysms of the 18th century or the flood at the beginning of the 19th century.